One beautiful young girl became a character in a novel called Villains Don't Like Any Road Except Money, and she was the only younger sister of the main character, Yuria, and her name was Cherry Mariol. Unlike Yuria, who possessed divine powers and brought a miracle to a poor count's family, Cherry was weak and did not bring in any money. She was nothing but a burden to everyone around her. On the day her sister went to the temple as a saint, the Count and Countess sold 10-year-old Cherry to the duchy for the smallest amount of money. And this duchy where the girl was sent was the home of her future husband. When Cherry first appeared in the Duchess's house, the woman said that she really hoped that they did the right thing in taking her in. The girl was very upset then. She understood that she was unlucky not only with her parents, but also with her mother-in-law. She was furious because she didn't understand how she could have ended up in this situation. If she had gotten to this place earlier, she would have tried to do at least something, but now it was too late. However, Cherie arrived in this place exactly one day before she was sold, and because of this, she was unable to change anything. On the day of her departure, her sister grabbed her by the hair and said that even if she did this many times, her fate of being sold into a snake den tomorrow could not change. Yuria said that she could rejoice in believing that the day had finally come when she, being completely useless, would bring money to their family. Eventually, Cherie realized that her sister was just as much of a money-obsessed villain as in the novel. That's why Roman had such a strange name. For some time, the girl sat on the ground and cried because she didn't know what to do next. Then a little boy came up behind her. He had blonde hair and yellow eyes, and with a trembling voice, he asked Cherry for forgiveness and said that she would have to marry someone like him. He said that he was very sorry that this really had to happen. But as soon as the skull looked at this baby, she could not look away. Cherry looked at him for a while, and then remembered that he too was in this place, the one who was supposed to become her husband. And so they met. This boy's name was Sibrin Nectorian, and this is a crazy psychopathic villain who turns the whole world into a sea of blood. Kibrin, who was called a monster from birth because of the snake scales and magic circles on his body, was locked in the Duke's secluded mansion. As he grew older, he was supposed to go mad with the thirst for revenge and eventually cruelly deal with all the people from the duchy. And Cherry was supposed to become his wife, and when she was no exception, he would also deal cruelly with her. Standing on her feet, the girl thought about her sister with a terrible character and her husband who would become a crazy killer in the future. All of this was now on her fragile shoulders. She told the boy that everything was fine. If she had not been collected from the duchy, she would have ended up in a much worse place, so she did not see any problems. Cherry even warned the boy that if she had not been taken to this place, she would probably have slept in the open air. The girl thought that perhaps she could raise the Cabrin so that he would not go astray. At least she wanted to try, because her life depended on it. And besides, the boy was very sweet, so she extended her hand to him and suggested that they get along. After all, they both were deprived of parental love, so they could compensate for it for each other. She felt special. Since she could influence the characters so much, she truly believed that she would succeed in any case. The boy didn't answer. Then, after a short silence, the skull asked where she was in the bedroom. She would like to see the place where they would live together. He had already started walking, but then he suddenly stopped. When he turned to the girl, she saw tears in his eyes again. For some reason, he was shaking all over and immediately asked what had happened. Then he pointed to her luggage and asked if he could carry it. Cherry was a little surprised. However, she understood that this was probably necessary according to the rules of etiquette, so she still gave him the suitcase. When he saw this, he was very amazed. He immediately smiled and said that he would definitely cherish it and do everything to deliver it safely. Then she realized that he was not only cute on the outside, but when he ran to the bedroom, she warned the young Duke that he had very long bangs, and if he ran like that, he would not see the way and would fall. The boy immediately protested. He said that he saw everything perfectly, so everything was fine, and some time passed from that moment, and they finally reached the right room. When she went inside, she was a little surprised when she saw the room. After all, it turned out to be much more spacious than she imagined. The girl realized that, most likely, this was not a children's room, and the windows did not even open. She specially approached to check this. She couldn't believe that these people were actually going to keep her locked up in this place until she grew up. For her, it was very strange. Then she looked at the bed, which was covered with a snow-white sheet, and said that apparently the bed linen was always changed to fresh ones. However, the boy replied that this was not true at all. In fact, No one goes to this place. Sherry looked at him in surprise and asked, "How is this possible?" The bedding was so clean, it looked like it had just been changed. The boy then explained that he simply did not sleep, and did not sleep on the bed, after which he pointed to the floor where several blankets were spread out. That was where he slept all the time. Cherry didn't understand why he did this, because there was a luxurious bed in the room, and he could even catch a cold this way. Kibrin, a little embarrassed, said that the bed was simply too big. The big girl did not understand how one could be afraid to sleep on a bed because it was too big, but she did not insist. Cherry sighed heavily and said that from that day on he would sleep with her since he was afraid to be alone in bed. Kibrin was very embarrassed and immediately asked if he really had to sleep with her. Then, after a short silence, he asked why she was so kind to him. This was truly unusual behavior. Cherie thought about it, but then she said that they were now husband and wife, and in such a relationship it was necessary to help each other. She also added that the young Duke could help her in the future. And besides, from now on, the place next to her would always be his, because she also wouldn't want to sleep alone on such a big bed. She sat down on their bed and knocked on the seat next to her, calling him over so that he would finally sit there. At this moment, the boy became embarrassed, but in the end he obeyed her and lay down next to her. The children lay down quite close to each other. The skull looked at him and said, "Is it true that together it's not so scary now?" With a trembling voice he agreed, and after that he asked how he should now address her. After all, he still didn't know. Then Cher realized that she still hadn't told him her name. The girl introduced herself and said that he could just call her by her name. Kibrin addressed her calling her Lady Cherry. The girl smiled and said that if it was convenient for him, he could call her that, and also added that she really hoped that they would get along with each other. She really firmly decided that her goal from this moment is to raise the Cybran well. He will not go crazy, and she will not die, but will show him the wonderful future that exists in this world. Thus they fell asleep, completely unnoticed by each other. But when the morning came, the skull woke up first. She had already changed her clothes and woke the boy up. She smiled, saw his gaze on her, and said that it was time for them to go to breakfast. And so the second day had arrived since she had been sold to the duchy. They went to the kitchen after the boy had also changed his clothes. She saw a small basket of vegetables that was on the top shelf. The girl even tried to reach it with a chair, but it was too high. Cherry didn't understand. Could it be that there wasn't a single chef in the mansion, and why the food was placed so high up? Was it really so that they couldn't get anything themselves? Cyberin was the same height as she was, so he himself wouldn't have been able to reach it. If the boy was hungry, he wouldn't even be able to cook anything for himself. No matter how it was, taking away the child and even not feeding him normally was too much. Being Korean in her past life, she absolutely could not forgive this. For some time, the skull tried to reach the fruit, but she couldn't. She realized that if she couldn't get this basket, then they would be without food that day, so she didn't know what to do. Then she looked in the kitchen and saw a stick nearby that could help, so she immediately went up to it and took it in her hands. She turned to her Duke and pointed at her and said that she would throw the basket and he would have to catch it. Then she also handed over the fabric that was lying nearby and said that with the help of this sheet he could do it. But she warned him to also be very careful because the basket could fall on his head and this cannot be allowed. At this moment, the children approached the basket of vegetables again, and Cherry managed to knock it off the shelf with the help of a stick. And the boy easily began to catch all the food in the sheet. As soon as he succeeded, he was very happy and immediately told the girl that he was able to do it. Cherry sat down opposite him and looked in to see what kind of catch they had. There was an apple, a potato, and a carrot. Then the girls came up with the idea that they could add meat, and then they made a very tasty stew. She smiled and said that she would prepare it for young Hertz. Then the girl went to the table and immediately began peeling potatoes. But then suddenly she stopped abruptly and realized that the knife was too big for her, so it was very easy to get hurt. When the boy saw how hard it was for her to do all this, he asked her to let him. Cherry, hearing this, was very surprised and asked if he had really cooked before. The boy replied that, unfortunately, he hadn't done this yet. However, he thought that he would do a little better than her, since the girl had cut off half the potato while trying to peel it. Cherry sighed heavily, unable to believe that her culinary abilities had been revealed so easily. In fact, in her past life, the kitchen had always been a complete mess when she cooked, and she believed that this failure had remained with her in this life. She eventually agreed to let him help, but told him to be careful and not to cut himself under any circumstances. The boy quickly took the knife and was able to peel the potatoes. It was a little uneven. However, it was definitely better than the cherry ones. When she saw the result, she immediately smiled and said that he really did well thanks to the Cybrin. While the boy continued to peel vegetables, the girl asked what he had been eating while she was gone. Kibrin looked at her with a worried look through. Realizing that he was uncomfortable, she asked for forgiveness and said that she did not want to pressure him. She just became curious. The guy immediately said that he didn't want to talk about it when the girl asked why. He replied that she would think it was disgusting and he wouldn't want that. Then she realized that it was best not to ask about it anymore in order not to ruin her fragile relationship with him. That's why she said that they would now be together. There is food that they prepared. So now there is no need to be afraid. After some time, they made the stew that Cherry wanted. As soon as she tried it, she didn't find it tasty at all because there were no spices in it, and therefore it was very bland. In order to console herself a little, she said that at least they would definitely not be poisoned by this, but when the Kybrin tried this dish, he immediately beamed with joy and said that it was very tasty. Sherry became very scared because she was even afraid to imagine what kind of food he had eaten before, since he found this stew delicious. They continued their meal and the boy smiled and said that he really enjoyed eating with her. It was much more fun that way. While they were eating, Cherry looked at the boy and noticed that where his scales were under his eye, there were also many scratches. The girl realized that, in his sleep, he was constantly trying to tear off these scales, and because of this, she felt incredibly sorry, because it must have been very painful. When Kibrin noticed that she had been looking at him for so long, he suddenly looked up at her and asked if she was really disgusted by his face. Sherry replied that this was not true at all. He was even cute. She stroked his head and told him to keep eating. He needed to eat a lot in order to grow taller than her. Kibrin then asked if it was really necessary for him to be taller than her, since he really liked the fact that she was taller. Sherry smiled and said that in that case, she would try to grow up herself. She would like them to grow up together, and the boy also liked the idea. After their breakfast, the girl went to the office and immediately began to look at some of the papers that were there. After this, Cherry began to write down on paper what they needed. A ladder was definitely on this list. She also wrote down that they needed new clothes because the dress she had was very heavy and impossible to wear. She had a dress that was hung with huge precious stones, so it was almost impossible to change it without a maid. Kibrin suddenly noticed that her hand was shaking all the time when she wrote. The girl explained that this was due to the fact that the pen was too big for her. She also checked all the windows just in case before this. However, even in the library, they were locked from the outside. Everything looked luxurious, although in reality, they were just in prison. But sunlight is very important for a growing child. Therefore, she was very sad that they ended up in such conditions. While they were writing down the necessary things, they suddenly heard some kind of knocking behind them. Sherry immediately asked what it was, and the boy, in a panic, replied that people would arrive very soon. She guessed that the ringing of the bell announced their arrival. Kibrin immediately replied that he needed to hide immediately. The girl suggested going together. He continued to insist on his own and kept talking about how he needed to hide, but then she calmed him down and told him to go with her. The girl extended her hand to him and led him towards the sound of this ringing. Then from around the corner, they saw several maids who were walking in their direction. The girls were constantly talking about something. One of them said that she was always disgusted. Come to this place, but you still had to clean there. After that, another maid said that the senior maid said that Madam sent a new dress. She suggested taking a few precious stones to lift her spirits. The girl believed that no one would even notice, but they would delight themselves. But the other maid panicked and immediately asked what would happen if they were caught. Her partner laughed and said that anyway, she was the same monster as the boy, so there was nothing to be afraid of. Cherie, who was sitting and covering the Cybrian's ears so that he would not hear all this, was very outraged by the behavior of the maids, but she thought that it would be even better this way. After they left, she suggested that the young gentleman go and see what was outside. Seeing his frightened expression, she immediately asked if he was really not curious at all. Cybrian didn't even know what to answer. He simply lowered his head and remained silent. Then she realized that he had probably been told countless times not to go outside, and that this was why he was afraid. But the girl decided to cheer him up. She took his hand and said that everything would be okay. Nothing would happen because she would be there. So he didn't need to be afraid. He still took her hand. She happily led him towards the exit and said that he was a great guy. He could just trust her and then everything would definitely be fine. When they ran to the exit, Tokeri looked out from around the corner and saw the open doors. The maid's route was now checked. However, there was a carriage outside, as well as a knight guarding it, which made their work a little more difficult. Cherie assumed he was a newbie, so she was still happy and smiled as she told the young duke that they could now go. After some time, they finally went outside, and the knight immediately looked at them with caution. He warned the children that they were not allowed to go outside, so he advised them to return back immediately before he had to take certain measures. But the girls studied his tense posture and realized that he was definitely a newbie, because he felt very insecure and even afraid. And besides, the uniform on him looked completely new. Cherry decided to take advantage of this wonderful opportunity. She said that she needed something and asked if he could help her. Then the girl handed him a piece of paper. The guy sighed heavily and said that she could calmly ask the maids who had just entered the mansion. Cherry continued to hold the sheet. She said that she couldn't do it. They were very busy. Besides, they went to tear the jewelry off her dress. The man immediately said that they were very carefully selected, so this definitely could not have happened. The girl asked in an angry voice, "Did he really just want to say that this meant that she was lying to the knight?" The man thought about this for a while. Then he said that he needed to check everything and asked if they could wait in that case. Cherry certainly didn't object, but the man asked them not to go too far. Otherwise, there would be serious problems. The children stood in silence for a while. Then the girl looked around and saw a really large and beautiful mansion. He really looked luxurious, but his nickname was Snake Lair. Since birth, Kibrianen has had snake scales on his face and magical circles on his back. His father, the Duke, examined even his son's back, and as a result, he found out that it was a complex sealing magic. It usually manifested when someone cast a spell, but such a spell cannot be cast on a child while he is in the womb. And eventually, people began to say that Cyprin is simply a monster. He was a monster that God sealed away before he was born because the hideous snake wore a human mask. The Duke and Duchesses believed this rumor especially strongly, and as a result, they imprisoned their own son in this mansion, which was nicknamed the Zvin's Lair. And this happened on the day of his 9th birthday. Sherry wondered how much time had passed since the Kibrin had last been outside. She even considered that perhaps it might have been the first time since he had been locked up. Normally in such a situation, she would have suggested running away, although, of course, they would be caught immediately if they tried to do this, so she didn't even suggest it. The girl, seeing his worried face, said that since they had already left, the young Duke could look around to his heart's content. The guy replied with a trembling voice that he had already looked at everything. He said that all the flowers around were very beautiful and the sky was clear. However, Lady Cherry was much more beautiful than all of this. Smiling, he said that her hair was the color of dawn, so it was pleasant for him to look even just at her. The girl certainly didn't expect to hear this. She thought that perhaps she should thank him for such a compliment, but she even felt a little confused. Finally, seeing his worried expression, she smiled and thanked him for the compliment so that he would not think that he had done something wrong. But Cherry said that it was still best to look around and nod at her face, since he hadn't been outside for so long. The guy was about to say something, but he didn't have time because the maid ran out into the street. She started screaming that they were not guilty at all. She fell on her knees in front of the children and asked for help. She said that it really wasn't them, and it was all just a coincidence. But the knight said in a rough voice that jewelry was found in the maid's things after checking. It turned out that these were the same stones from the young lady's dress. He said that he would definitely report this to Madame so that these maids would be duly punished for their misdeeds. At that moment, the maid looked at Sherry and began to ask the girl to save them. But of course, the girl did not fall for her provocations. She thought that this girl was really a very good actress. Although she did indeed tear the decorations off her dress, considering how she is treated in the duchy, she didn't really need to act much. Cherie suggested that she could probably even compete with her sister in a best acting competition, and she wouldn't even know who would win. She noticed the symbol on her dress and realized that it was a symbol of the temple. Cherry was very wary. She didn't understand why people from the temple worked as maids in the ducal court. It was very suspicious. At this moment, the knight turned to the children and told the two of them to immediately return to the mansion, and he also asked for forgiveness for the disturbance and the situation that had arisen. He said that he was very sorry, then took the maid and left. When the children returned back to the mansion, Cherry wanted to talk to the young duke about those maids, but the guy sighed heavily and replied that the people from the temple were all like that. He said that they were deliberately creating problems in order to help his mother, but the girl did not respond to this. She seriously thought about this situation. In the original story, the reasons for the imprisonment of the Cabrin were not only the Duke and Duchess, but also significant pressure from the temple itself. That's why Cabrina took revenge on both the ducal cheetah and the temple in the original story. Although Skull thought that for now he doesn't hold a grudge against the Duchess. She thought that because the original was discontinued, she didn't know how it all ended, but the ending of the Cybran was definitely not the best. And on the contrary, the main character, that is, Sister Cherry and her temple, probably flourished. The girl thought about what would happen if she went down the wrong path. She even began to fear that the only right decision was not to get involved with him from the very beginning. In the end, she decided not to think about it anymore, because she decided that everything was already lost, and there was definitely no way back for her. Then suddenly, seeing her sad expression, the Cybran asked, "Is it really necessary for him not to speak like that?" The girl was surprised, but she stroked his head as a sign of consolation. Sherry said that he could tell her everything. After all, they should now be quite close to each other, so he didn't have to be afraid. She herself thought about what could be done here now. All she could do was somehow educate him and try to make him kinder than in the original. When night fell and the boy had already fallen asleep, the girl could not fall asleep for a long time either, so she went to the window and looked at the view from there. After that, she took the precious stones in her hands and squeezed them in her palm. Sherry thought that this was precisely why the first thing she needed to do was get out of this damned mansion, because otherwise, her plan would definitely not work. During the day, the maids tore these diamonds from her clothes, and in the kitchen, she barely managed to get the magic stone from the lantern. Cherry thought that this was enough for her to be able to break this window. At least, she really hoped. In the original work, there were two types of magic stones. Red magic stones that could sometimes be obtained by killing monsters, and artificial ones, which were blue and were created by magicians similar to the first ones. Blue magic stones were especially vulnerable to diamonds, and would cause a weak explosion when broken. She recalculated that if she breaks this window, she will be able to go out onto the terrace. From the outside, it was clear that if she ties a rope, she could even climb down. Of course, she wasn't going to run away right now. First, she needed to secure an escape route, and then gradually wait for a convenient opportunity. She was glad that the maids practically never entered the Kibrin's room. Otherwise, they would have definitely been able to find her stones. The girl was very worried about her because she didn't know if these gloves would be enough for her. After all, it could seriously harm her, but she had to at least try because she couldn't raise a Cybrian in such a terrible place. So she touched these two stones together, and a rather strong spark appeared from there. In fact, even before the boy was locked in the castle, he was told that it was dangerous for the young master to go outside. The Duchess was, of course, a little upset to hear this, but she tried to calm the boy down and said that she would definitely find a solution to this problem. But the Duke was not as nice as the woman. He took her with him to a separate estate and told the boy that he was interfering with their lives. So the boy decided that his father was really right. He just can't control my disaster, which at any time can do terrible things. He knew that it was not the world that was dangerous, but he himself who ended up in the temple. He was told that the young master needed to be isolated, and that is exactly what his parents did. It was very painful for the Duchess to say goodbye to her son. She didn't want to lock him up and simply told him to wait. A little while longer, very soon, she had to find the right solution. In the middle of the night, Cybran accidentally woke up and immediately noticed that Cherry was not nearby, and looked around to understand where she had gone. He saw that Cherry was near the window. The girl, hearing that the Duke had woken up, immediately looked at him and asked why he had suddenly gotten up. The window in front of her was broken. She asked for forgiveness for waking him. After all, she tried with all her might to be quiet. Kibrin looked at her in surprise. He also noticed that she had hurt her hands quite badly. The guy asked what she had done. Now she explained that the window was closed, and neither cool nor sunlight could get into this place. So she decided to break it and open it. She asked if he was happy because now he could breathe in the fresh air as much as he wanted. She thought that was very good. So she said that if you put your hand through this gap and open the window from the outside, you could even go out there. But Kibrin got up from his place and said that he was not happy at all. He approached her and, taking her hand, said that she got hurt because of this. Sherry smiled and said that everything was fine. It didn't even hurt. It would definitely heal with time, so he didn't have to worry. The boy asked her to let him look more closely through the glass. She was amazed and did not understand why he was so upset. At that moment, tears welled up in his eyes again. Of course, she allowed him to look after that. He took off her gloves. And then she said that he probably didn't like to look at that. So she suggested that maybe it would be better if he didn't do that. But Kibrin said that there was nothing terrible about it. Then he saw a wound on her hands, after which a bright light suddenly appeared, and these wounds healed. She was very surprised to see this. However, Cherry suddenly noticed and realized that because he began to treat her, the scales on his face began to spread. The girl immediately screamed and said that it was hard for him, so she asked him to stop better. The boy replied that everything was fine, and after some time her hands were completely healthy. Then the skull realized that Cyprian had a healing ability. This was never actually mentioned in the novel. She said that the young duke was a great guy and asked if he had always been able to do this. The guy, a little embarrassed, said that he himself actually didn't know how it happened. In fact, the healing ability was supposed to be even for magicians. That is why her sister the saint was so revered throughout the world. Cherry then said that it was a pity that he didn't know how to do it, because she thought that this could cure his hand. But the boy replied that it didn't hurt at all, so everything was fine. She was silent for a while, but then asked if she could find out exactly what kind of injury he had. The guy said that he got hurt because he is a monster. Of course, the skull didn't like the fact that he said something like that. She got angry and said that he was not a monster at all, and also asked if it was true that he could easily get along with her, and that she did not at all consider him to be somehow different. Kibrin smiled and said that it was all because she was simply wonderful, and after that, he thought that perhaps the lady was the same as him. She got along with him because she was also a monster. The girl certainly didn't expect to hear this. It was certainly difficult to say that it wasn't so she just smiled and said that perhaps everything was exactly like that. The boy, hearing this, became even happier. He said that it meant, "It's really true, of course." Cherry couldn't tell him that it wasn't true. He was very happy about this, so she thought it was even for the best. Kibrin suddenly returned to the bed. He said that he suddenly felt sleepy, so he would go back to sleep, and also asked for forgiveness for being interrupted like that. Cherry didn't object. She said that she would also go to bed soon and wished him good night. The girl thought that all this was strange. The healing ability of the Cyprian, which was not in the original, and its attitude towards the Duchess, which did not seem to contain hostility, were different from what she knew. There was too much information that was not in the original, so the girl assumed that perhaps there was some other reason that was not mentioned in the story. The next day after the skull delivered its letter to the children, the Duchess herself arrived at the palace. The woman said that from now on, she would personally control everything. Of course, Cherry was very surprised to hear this, because she did not think that the woman herself would want to personally fulfill her request. The Duchess even brought a maid with her and said that all the dresses she had given them before had to be thrown away, because now they would have new ones. When she gave Cherry the new version of Nora's outfit, she asked the girl to look at it and say her opinion on whether she liked it or not. The little girl immediately looked at the hangers and asked what exactly she was supposed to evaluate. Then the Duchess said that she meant those dresses that were hanging, and I wanted to know if the girl would now be able to put them on by herself. Smiling, she replied that this would be enough for her overall, and also thanked her, but she herself did not understand why the Duchess decided to take such care of her. It was strange, and at that moment, the door to the room suddenly opened, and Cyprian ran in. He saw his mother and was immediately happy, because he had not seen her for a very long time. But while he was running to meet her, he accidentally even tripped. The boy fell to the ground, and when the Duchess saw this, she immediately became worried and ran to meet him, but she was able to stop herself pretty quickly. The woman was certainly uncomfortable, but she just needed to restrain herself. Sherry decided to take matters into her own hands. She approached the young duke and asked if he was okay and if he had hurt himself. The boy rubbed his hand, which he had slightly touched, and said that everything was fine, while the girl turned to the Duchess and thought about this strange reaction when she saw the Cyprian fall. Then she realized that there were some circumstances that she didn't know about, and in the end, the Duchess simply turned around and started to leave, saying that it was time for her to go. The woman didn't explain anything properly, so Cherry decided to check what was really going on between them. She quickly stood up and ran up to the Duchess. Having stopped her, the girl said that she would make her some tea. She suggested that she rest a little, and eventually even called the Duchess mother. I heard exactly how she called her, and she got very angry and looked at Cherry with an icy gaze. A maid who was standing nearby said that the Duchess should not have stayed in this place for long, because she still had some business to do in the palace. Cherry was very indignant at this moment. She did not understand why some servant could boldly control the actions of her mistress. This seemed even more suspicious to her. She thought about the fact that the maids who were there last night were also from the temple. She suggested that perhaps this could also be somehow connected, so she decided to study this issue further. The Duchess looked at the maids and said that they were making too much noise, but the maid told her not to forget that she was in this place precisely because of that accident. But the woman was not going to listen to them. She sighed heavily and asked Cherry to bring her tea. She still agreed to stay a little longer. After some time, the girl finally made tea. The Duchess drank it and said that the taste was simply disgusting. She hadn't drunk anything like that for a long time. Cherry replied that the young Duke brewed it. Then the woman said that, in fact, it is very useful for the body, because it is bitter to the tongue, but can help improve the stomach. Then she began to think about the fact that the Duchess really turned out to be completely different from what she knew from the novel. In the original, she was just a typical villainous extra who hated her ugly son, who was different from everyone else. But now this woman has revealed herself to be a completely different person, who simply cannot be trusted. Moreover, the girl was very wary of these strange maids from the temple, because even when the Duchess was drinking tea, one of them passed by and said that time was passing, and also asked if she was afraid that this would have a bad effect on the young master. Cherry couldn't understand why these maids were acting as if they were trying with all their might to separate the Duchess from the Cyprian. Eventually, the woman finished her tea and said that it really was time for her to go. Before leaving, she told the children, "If you want to survive, keep your eyes open. You have no allies here." Cherry, of course, understood that this was addressed specifically to her, so, smiling happily, she told her mother that she would definitely remember this rule and use it. Then the woman left, and a little boy immediately turned to her and said that if she didn't mind, he would really like to always be near her. Smiling, she thanked him and said that of course she wouldn't mind after that. He asked if the Duchess had really said that she would now control everything personally. The girl said that of course it was all true, and also, noticing his facial expression, she added that the young Duke looked quite happy. She asked if he really loved meeting the Duchess so much. Kibrin said that this was indeed the case, but he also really liked Cherry. The girl thanked him again, but she thought that he probably assumed that she asked this out of jealousy, although this is not the case. After this, the girl thought about the fact that there were still some differences from the original, and when the Duchess came the next day, she would have to monitor all of this very carefully. However, everything did not turn out as Cherry expected, because the next day the maid came to them and said that Madame would not be able to come that day. Of course, the girl immediately became wary. She asked why this had happened, because the previous day everything had gone perfectly, and there had not even been a hint that something might be wrong. When she asked what had happened, the woman replied that nothing could be done. Since they had neglected the generosity shown by the temple, they would carry out cleansing work that day, so she warned the children to behave quietly. At that moment, the maids entered the room and began to bring in some boxes and buckets. She realized that this was not generosity at all, but a threat on their part, and she certainly did not like it. She immediately asked why they needed to carry out these cleaning works. The maid already wanted to answer something, but didn't have time. The Cyprian intervened in the conversation and said that all the places he had been to were desecrated, so they needed to be cleansed periodically. That was why they had come. She explained that if she didn't do this, then Mom and Dad would be in danger. The maid smiled maliciously and said that everything was exactly like that. After that, she looked at the boy with an angry look and said that if the young gentleman was really worried about the Duchess, he would not interfere. At that very moment, she reached out to him with her hand. Of course, Cherry didn't like it. She stood in front of the woman and, removing her hand, asked what she was doing. The maid, surprised, asked if the girl was really behaving like a little mistress of the ducal house. She assumed that, apparently, it was very rare for the girl to have the status of a saint's sister, and so she decided to command. But Cherry, indignant, said that it was not very pleasant to look at her, a servant who was arrogant because of her connection with the temple, and therefore she was no different. Of course, upon hearing this, the maid was very indignant. She asked, "Is it really true that the girl, since she thinks that she is a holy sister, is allowed to do anything?" But the little girl wasn't going to let her treat her like that. She told her to shut up and asked how she, a person without feminine strength, could even boldly open up in this conversation. In fact, even though Cherry really hated her status as a saint's sister, she was still allowed to do some things. In the original, her character also had a reaction of rejection from divine power, but her sister's power was something of an exception to the rule. In any case, she didn't feel anything, that is, the maid. So she assumed that there was probably nothing special about this woman, because her reaction to those words also made a lot clear. The maid turned around indignantly and began to leave, and Cherry now began to at least roughly guess what the matter was. She judged from what she saw, and realized that the temple was using the Cybrian as a cover to manipulate the ducal family at its own discretion. And when she thought about it, she realized that in the original, it was the temple that first called him a monster. So the girl definitely wanted to be wary of this temple. Although the novel didn't say that they sent people to separate the Cybrian and the Duchess, the skull had a slight feeling that Roman was simply deceiving her. The girl took the Cybrian away from all these servants who began to clear the territory, and said that she did not like these people from the temple at all. The boy said that he didn't like them either, and his mom and dad said that everything was fine. Even though he was born a monster, they promised that they would always be there, so he just had to listen to what they said. But Cherry suddenly had an idea, and she asked if it was true that his mom and dad changed after those people from the temple came. To this, the boy merely nodded his head in agreement. And then the girl realized that in order for him to grow up good, he had to leave this mansion, and as soon as possible. However, if they secretly escaped, the temple would be able to catch the two children without any problems. But she also could not expose the temple's misdeeds without evidence, which is why she faced a dilemma. But the skull was thinking that perhaps her father-in-law and mother-in-law would also want to live nearby in Cyprus. So she turned to the boy and asked if he would like to run away. Hearing this, he was of course very surprised, but said that he really wanted to leave. So Cherry, smiling happily, suggested doing it anyway. The boy immediately asked how exactly she was going to do it. Cherry quickly explained her whole idea to him. When night fell, she walked around the entire mansion and made sure that there was no one left there. Everyone had left. She also thought about all the escape routes they had planned. So while they were sleeping in the kitchen on the first floor, a fire would start for some unknown reason. They will wake up and see strange smoke and flames, and will rush to escape through the window of the room on the second floor in order to save their lives. Cherry considered her plan to be simply perfect, because it really shouldn't arouse any suspicions, and then she could do everything simply perfectly. But the only problem she had was that they had to jump from the second floor, and this was quite a high area. Cherry really hoped that she would be able to cope. If she fell the wrong way, then at the very least the girl would definitely get a fracture. In the end, she broke the window so much that she was able to go out onto the veranda and check whether the rope would be long enough. By that time, Kipri had already approached her. He turned to the girl and said that he had everything ready. He said that he did exactly as she said. If you pull the rope, the magic stone and the diamond will collide. She said that he was a great guy and replied that he did everything right. After that, she took the rope from him and asked him to step back because it was quite dangerous. Kibrin immediately did so. Then Cherry pulled the rope very hard, and the reaction happened instantly. A flame immediately broke out in the kitchen, and the children saw a bright fire that began to spread very quickly throughout the entire estate. Cherry was overjoyed to see this. She was happy that the first part of their plan had finally been successfully implemented. Then she told the young duke that she would go down first, and after that she would catch him with a blanket, so that he still had to go down very carefully. The boy was not against. Cherry quickly began to descend the rope. Her hands were shaking very much at that moment, because she could fall at any moment. But the girl also had confidence in her eyes. She knew that it was only the second floor. So, not so high up, the situation could have been even worse. She also decided that as soon as she was as close to the ground as possible, she would simply calmly let go of the rope and jump. The distance would not be that great, and she would not even get a single dislocation. But for some reason, her hands suddenly started to slip. Cherry couldn't hold on. She started to fall and already thought that she would break. But to her great surprise, she landed quite softly. For a moment, she even felt her body begin to fly. And after that, she slowly descended towards the earth. The young Duke jumped after her, and when Cherry heard the loud sound of him landing on the ground, she turned around sharply and looked at what it was. When the girl saw him in front of her, she was very surprised. She did not understand how he could jump and land so deftly. She was about to say something, but quickly changed her mind. Cherie understood that psychopathic villains were unusual since childhood. Her sister was exactly the same. So she decided not to bother too much about asking unnecessary questions. Then she looked at the estate, which was already completely engulfed in flames, and noticed that, fortunately for them, even the rain had begun, which was really good. She said that the mansion was already quite badly burned, but she burned down the mansion belonging to the ducal family, so if they are exposed, they will probably be separated into different places. Kibrian, hearing about this, was very surprised and immediately asked what exactly she meant. The girl at that very moment began to worry that she might even be asked to pay for the repairs, and she wouldn't be able to do it. The boy said in a rough voice that this would never happen at that very moment. A carriage drove up to the estate very quickly. As soon as she stopped, the Duchess immediately jumped out from behind her and began shouting Cybran's name because she was afraid that something could happen to him. The maid didn't let her go for some reason, and the woman then started shouting loudly and told her to let her go immediately, saying she should have been more likely to offend her son. Cherry understood that the situation was serious, so she pushed the boy and told him to come to her himself. He looked at the girl with alarm and asked what would happen to her. Cherry replied that she was fine. The boy immediately ran to his mother, while she simply stood and watched. Then, suddenly a man appeared behind her. He had light hair and yellow eyes just like Cybran's. He approached the girl with an umbrella and covered her so that she wouldn't get even wetter. When the skull looked at him, she immediately realized that he smelled of cigars, and his right hand was hidden. She immediately knew that this was the boy's father. The man asked if she was hurt anywhere, and she immediately said that she was fine, but she couldn't take her eyes off him. In fact, this man's name was Menric Nectorian. He was the biological father of Cybrian. He was also the youngest swordmaster and the de facto ruler of the Lost Dark City. But despite his abilities in the original, he hardly appeared. At some point in history, rumors even began to spread that Winter had become the head of the family in place of her wayward husband. However, the girl did not know how exactly he lost his right hand. In the original, she said that she was causing a disturbance in the temple, but the details were not revealed. At that moment, the man handed the girl an umbrella and told her to hold it, because as she herself saw, his hand was not in the best condition, so it was uncomfortable for him. After that, he took her in his arms, and thus the umbrella was able to cover both of them at the same time. The skull thought that Brian's schemes turned out to be completely different from those in the novel. However, she was completely unsure about the man. Because the girl was carried away by her thoughts, she tilted the umbrella slightly, and because of this, it dripped on the man's head. She immediately loudly asked for forgiveness, because she understood that he could punish her for this. But to her surprise, the man said in a calm voice that there was nothing wrong with it, thanks to her. He was now completely awake. Cherry couldn't believe that he wasn't angry. Then she suddenly heard her mother and Kibri talking. The woman said that she couldn't go close to him. They said that she would hurt him. The woman kept saying that it was her fault. The boy, of course, burst into tears, but he said that he was fine, so she didn't have to worry. At that moment, Cherry turned to the Duke and asked him to let her go. The man was, of course, surprised, but he allowed her to leave his hands. She ran up to the boy and said that she would stay under the same umbrella with the young Duke. The man, of course, did not object, although he hoped that he too would not have to get wet in the rain. When the skull ran to Cyprus, it immediately shared with the umbrella. She said that if he continued to sit in the rain, he would definitely catch a cold, and this was definitely not allowed. The boy replied that he was fine, but the skull hugged him and moved him closer to her so that he would be within the umbrella's range, and said that he certainly didn't need to be told that he was fine. She said that it was all because she had reliable shoulders that could hug her, so he didn't have to worry about it at all. For a moment, he felt a little sad again, but still agreed to her help and decided that he could really trust Chera to some extent. After everything calmed down, the Duke was brought a new umbrella. He turned to Genial Winter and said that it was time for them to return. The girl became a little sad and didn't even answer. She just sat opposite the children with her head down and didn't react at all. Cherry was a little scared for her. She went up to her mother and asked if everything was okay with her. The woman suddenly asked in a sharp voice not to call her that. The girl didn't answer this. She only asked in a surprised voice, "Didn't the woman really want to ask where the fire came from and how they managed to escape from there?" Winter replied that even though she had bought her from that Count Mayer, she still shouldn't have considered herself her equal, and they could talk about this calmly later. After that, she said that they shouldn't continue to just stand in the rain, so she asked them to immediately get into the carriage. They would arrive in a dry, safe place, and then they would decide everything. As they drove away from the burning estate, Cherry kept looking out the window. After this, she turned to the Duke and asked, "Will Mother not go with them, since the woman remained there?" The man immediately explained that she would arrive later, separately saying that if Winter approaches Cyber, then his condition will worsen. And that is why she was very afraid of all this. The woman did not want to risk his health. The man suddenly glanced at her in Cyprus and said that, of course, the temple had always disliked their family. So, of course, this was most likely a lie. However, it is possible that some of this was true, that if these dogs from the temple told the truth, it meant that the Duchess could really hurt and harm her child, so she just did not want to take the risk. He said that all these thoughts also did not leave his head, and it was difficult for him to risk the health of his own child. He said that, of course, they could not be considered the best parents, but still, he was consoled by the thought that even despite such sacrifices, they would know that the cybernetic was safe. Sherry looked at the man in surprise. She had absolutely no idea what kind of person this Duke was. He was behaving quite contradictorily. However, this was quite natural now. After all, they are not simple characters of the fragrance, so such behavior was to be expected. After some time, the man suddenly said that they were almost there, so he asked the children to get ready. He immediately became curious about what the palace looked like, and she looked out the window. As soon as she saw this luxurious building, she could not contain her admiration. The man, seeing her expression, immediately began to smile. He said that this meant that she liked it, after which he turned to the coachman and asked him to slow down a little so that she could admire the beauty of the castle. After some time, they finally arrived, and the man helped the children out. He said that they would leave the capital as soon as possible. He said that by taking the Cybrian out of the mansion, they had broken the agreement with the temple, and therefore they needed to quickly correct the situation. Cher immediately asked what kind of agreement they were talking about, since she had never heard anything like it before, but the man explained that the temple was actively helping to contain the treatment, in exchange for Key Brian being forced to remain in isolation in a separate wing the entire time, and they and Winter should not leave the capital so that the temple can watch them. Well, there were also a few more details. For example, they checked whether the monster really was sending the so-called tribute. Cherry at that moment realized that when he called something a tribute, he probably meant her. In the original, it was written that the boy was simply sent a toy for entertainment. Not a toy, but a tribute. In the end, Cherie realized that she had really been deceived by Roman, for whom she had lost her money. She would really like to meet the author Raphael someday, so that he could explain everything to her. Then Cherie suddenly asked in surprise why the man decided to tell her all about this. He extended his hand to help her out of the carriage, and said that she still wouldn't be able to understand everything. The girl did not object, because she understood that, according to the original story, she was only 10 years old, so it was obvious. She asked if they would go to the ducal estates after leaving the capital. The man said that this might be the case, and when she asked if she would go with them, the man replied that if she wanted to, she would go. After Cherry got out of the carriage, the man again extended his hand for his son, but the Cybrian did not take it. He got down on his own and simply walked past him. The man was very hurt by this. Cherry watched his reaction and realized that something was wrong there. She assumed that they really did not have the best relationship. The next carriage finally pulled up. The Duchess came out. A man came up to help her out, and Winter immediately ordered Mary to take Sherry to the bathroom and wash her thoroughly. The Duke and Duchess passed by the children and went to the estate. The woman said that it was even better this way, since their father would never have given them the saint anyway. Cherry, hearing this, immediately thought that it was completely unlikely that her sister would obediently go even if her dad let her go. So, it was inevitable. In the original, the sister also never used divine power unless she wanted to. It even got to the point that her dad gave in, and even the main character, the Crown Prince, came to persuade her. Moreover, from the very beginning, the sister's divine power would not have recognized the Cabrian scale as a disease. At that moment, the maid escorted the girl to the bathroom. The original said that the adult boy had no scales, and that she had been thinking about it all this time. She wondered how he could have gotten rid of her if it weren't for her sister's divine power. It would be very good if she simply disappeared with age when she climbed into the hot bath. Then Mary suddenly asked in an alarmed voice if she was probably very cold. She took the girl by the hand, and seeing how thin her hand was, she was very scared. She could not believe that a child of her age could have such problems. Mary asked for forgiveness and said that she had to take care of her. Maids who did not belong to the temple were strictly forbidden to enter that mansion. Sherry was very shocked when she heard this. She saw tears in the maid's eyes and could not believe that she was so worried about her. It struck her so strongly because she knew that this was only a formal marriage, but in reality, she was simply sold. Moreover, she was the sister of the saint who did not treat the Kibrin, and she can be accused of arson. She can't even object to this. At that moment, Cherie thought about why she had so many sins at such a young age. Mary wiped away her tears and said that it was very stupid to cry because the lady was probably very scared, so she asked her for forgiveness and also thanked her for the fact that the girl was next to the young gentleman all this time. But smiling at the woman, she also said that now she would be next to the young lady and asked her to eat a lot of tasty things and definitely get better. Cherry felt very unusual about this. After she got to this place, no one had ever treated her so well because of this. She herself could not contain her feelings and shed a few tears. She said that as soon as the lady washes up, she will prepare her some warm cocoa. It is very tasty, so the girl will definitely like it. She had a very strange feeling, but Cherry did not think about it. She thanked the maid for it, and after that, they continued to wash. After this, the maid escorted her to the room and said that today she could sleep with the young master, and tomorrow she would have her own room. Mary smiled and said that she would soon bring cocoa, and in the meantime, the children could get settled in. The girl thought that she was a real angel, and the Cibrian was very happy when he saw Lady Cherry. He said that he could not believe his happiness that he really returned home again. His eyes just lit up with joy. He said that his mother told him that he didn't need to come back. After that, he asked Lady Cherry if she could do anything she wanted. The girl was a little embarrassed. She said that, of course, she couldn't do everything, but seeing his sparkling eyes, she still said that she really could do everything. Kibrin said that it was amazing to come up with the idea of setting the house on fire in order to return home. He would never have thought of that before, but at that moment, through a friend, I realized that it was very strange that absolutely no one asked about the fire in the mansion. Even though she made it sound pretty plausible, they could still ask for details. The skull suggested that perhaps they were going to ignore it because of her. She didn't know what to do when suddenly the boy asked her in surprise if everything was okay with her because her face was very focused. But Sherry decided not to worry about it too much. After all, they had just arrived and she assumed that she was simply jumping to conclusions. She told the young gentleman that it was time for them to go to bed. Kibrin immediately became indignant and said that he did not want to sleep at all, unlike the skull. Then she decided that it would be good to just tell him a story so that he would get tired and they would fall asleep. The boy was delighted and said that he always loved when she told stories. So they went to bed and the girls began her story. When the girl finished telling her story, she felt very sad. The Cibrian hugged her and said that he really hoped that next time this hard-working aunt would be happy. With these thoughts, she fell asleep and realized that before she became Cherry, she was a completely different person. Cherie suddenly woke up in the middle of the night and realized that she would like to know what her name was in her past life, because she did not remember it at all. After that, she fell asleep again. When she woke up the next time, the sun was already shining outside the window. She had a pretty serious case, and her skin suddenly itched. She thought that perhaps she had been bitten by some insect. Then suddenly, Kibrian turned to her when he saw that she had woken up. She asked the boy if he had slept well the previous night, because he had fallen asleep while she was telling him a story, and had not even had time to listen to the end. He smiled happily and said that everything was exactly like that. He remembered that story, and he suddenly felt uncomfortable, but he still said that it was very interesting. After that, he said that her mother called her and said that she needed to tell the girl something. He didn't know exactly, but decided to say it. The girl was very surprised by this, but she assumed that the lady probably just wanted to ask about the fire in the mansion and asked where she needed to go. Kibrian immediately said the place, but as soon as the girl stood up, she suddenly felt very dizzy. It was quite strange. She began to feel unwell from the very morning. She took the boy by the hand and, asking for forgiveness, asked if she could lean on him. The boy, of course, was a little surprised, but allowed her to do so. He was worried about her. After they changed, the girl still went downstairs. The Duchess was already there, and a man was standing nearby. She immediately realized that he was from the temple. She was wary, but now at least she was not surprised. Why did she feel so bad? It was all because of this divine power that emanated from them. A young man from the temple asked the Duchess if she really intended to be at odds with them, and he felt very sad about it. He said that they would take away all the maids belonging to the temple, and she would also have to send the young duke outside the capital before the next day. Winter, after listening to him, suddenly frowned after he finally fell silent. She asked if this was all he wanted to say. The man grimaced. He said that she was still as arrogant as ever, and asked if she didn't feel sorry for the inhabitants of the empire who were destined to become victims of the young duke. The man grimaced. He said that she was still as arrogant as ever, and asked if she didn't feel sorry for the inhabitants of the empire who were destined to become victims of the young duke. His other partners said that, however, she is not a resident of the empire, so of course she doesn't know anything. The Duchess said that, of course she knew nothing, but she considered the god of the empire to be merciful, since he allowed them to wag their tongues. Of course, the man from the temple was very indignant upon hearing this. He wanted to say something, but didn't have time because Winter interrupted him. The Duchess said that if he still had time to chat, then it would be better for them to leave. After all, they had said to leave before the change of day, and asked if they were really going to deliberately detain her. The children finally came down after the temple workers left, and they saw that the Duchess was not in the best mood. The woman was actually very angry. Then the skull suggested that she was not okay after all, so she had to conduct her own investigation in order to find out everything. She approached her mother and said that the woman had called her. The Duchess said that everything was correct. After that, she turned to the children and added that they would leave the capital as soon as they finished packing. She explained that they might never come back again, so if there was anything else Cherry wanted to do, she needed to hurry. The girl seriously thought about this. She understood that there was nothing special for her, and there was nothing to hold on to in this place. But then an idea came into the girl's head, and she asked if she could look at their garden. The Duchess was very surprised to hear this. She said that the girl was saying some pretty strange things. Winter explained that no one ever asks permission to have fun in their own home, which is why she was so surprised. She didn't say anything else. She just turned around and started to leave. The skull was very shocked by her words, but she realized that apparently this could be regarded as permission. After that, she began to think about the fact that she had definitely been deceived by this novel. Winter was like the personification of the carrot and stick. She made it so naturally clear that the girl was now a member of the ducal family that she herself did not even have time to realize it all so quickly. At that very moment, the boy suddenly looked into the open door that led to the street. When Cherie returned and saw that he had moved away from her, she immediately asked what he was doing there. Kibrin explained that he tried to remember their faces. Of course, he was talking about the priests. He said that when he grows up, he will definitely punish all these scoundrels. The girl said that it was very commendable of him. However, when the Cybrian added that he would kill them, she immediately felt uneasy. That's why she told him not to go that far. She could barely pull him out of that snake pit. So of course it couldn't have turned out that way. Kibrian immediately asked why she reacted that way. But the skull explained that, firstly, if he killed the priest, he would have very big problems. But the boy who was outraged said that he heard them saying that they wanted his mother to die quickly. When Cherry heard this, she was shocked because she herself had never heard anything like this. She didn't understand how it was possible to say something like that about parents in front of the child, so she told the boy that it might be okay if he didn't get caught committing this crime. But then the realization came to her. She said that it was still a long way off before he grew up, so she simply suggested thinking about all this a little later. Eventually, she realized that she almost succumbed to these provocations. She also knew that if she relaxed because he was a child, she would definitely not be able to avoid trouble. So she told the young gentleman that she wanted to go to the garden and asked if he would like to accompany her there. The boy smiled and said that he could not believe that on the last day before their departure forever, she would not want to visit her family. The girl said that she liked being with the young duke more, so she would like to do just that. Of course, Cherry couldn't say that her birth parents sold her to the ducal family, so she just got out of it this way. The boy no longer asked unnecessary questions, and they went outside. But as soon as she stepped over the threshold of the Duke's house, her head began to spin again, and she even heard some kind of ringing in her ears. She didn't understand why this happened, because she knew that the priests had left, but her bad state didn't go away. She couldn't stand on her feet, so she sat down on the ground. When the Sabrian saw this, he immediately came closer to her and asked if everything was okay with her. The girl said that everything was fine and that he should not call anyone for help. She herself thought about the fact that perhaps her poor condition was due to a cold. If it was some kind of hard-to-treat illness, then her father-in-law and mother-in-law might not even take her, so Cherry was a little scared. But she did not want to return to the Count's house under any circumstances. But the girl could not even notice how her condition worsened, and she simply lost consciousness. Of course, the Kibrians, seeing this, were very scared. Quite a lot of time had passed since then, and Cherry finally regained consciousness. When she finally opened her eyes, the first thing she saw in front of her was the Duchess, who had been sitting with a very angry expression on her face all this time. The girl jumped up in her bed when she saw her mother, but then she immediately remembered what exactly had happened and why she was now lying in bed. She turned to her mother and asked where the young Duke was, since she had been next to him all this time until she lost consciousness. Winter replied that he was taken to a room. He was very scared, so he needed to be calmed down a little. And besides, there was definitely nothing for him to do here. Cherie realized that this reaction was quite natural because a man suddenly fell next to him, so it was not surprising. But she would really like to know why exactly she fell. And besides, when she looked at the expression on her mother's face, she realized that she was not the best. She was afraid of the fact that if she had an incurable disease, it would definitely not take her. In such a case, she had to quickly figure out what to do. But then suddenly the Duchess, sighing heavily, unexpectedly for Cherie, asked her for forgiveness. She said that she was so absent-minded that for a moment she even forgot that other children were different from the Cybrian. She explained that there was no justification for anything, now she must take care of Cherie for real. And the woman also suggested that she would now need a nanny. As soon as the girl heard this, she could not believe her luck. Could the Duchess really have taken her with her from the capital? She thought she was lucky since she wasn't even kicked out. But when she heard an apology from such an important woman, she even started to feel strange. She was just a person who was sold to the ducal house, so of course no one had to apologize to her. Then the Duchess pointed towards the young woman standing next to her. It was Elena, the personal doctor of the ducal family. Therefore, while Cherry was unconscious, she looked at her. Elena greeted Lady. She said that the girl could simply call her by her first name. Cherry also greeted her and asked if there was something wrong with her case. The woman explained that the problem was quite serious, and that if things continued like this, the girl could eventually die even this year. When Cherry heard this, she was shocked. She couldn't believe that everything was so serious. In fact, in the original work, she was 17 when all the events of the story unfolded. She was very beautiful like her older sister Yuria. However, Cherry never looked happy, so the girls suddenly became interested in how she managed to live so long. The Duchess said that in this condition, she would definitely not be able to survive the trip to the duchy, so she thought about what they should have done in such a situation. Hearing this, the girl was shocked. She again thought about the fact that perhaps the Duchess was really going to leave her, so the girl screamed loudly and said that she could endure everything. Winter put her finger on her head and asked the little girl to hold back her emotions. She wanted to think about how they could resolve this situation correctly. She thought for a while, and then said that in 3 days, Melik would be able to buy them time. The Duchess asked Elena if she was responsible for the restoration of Cherry before the arrival of Viscount Rose. The woman was a little worried upon hearing this. After some thought, she said that in order for young Lady Cherry to gain normal weight, she would need to be fed 5 times a day for at least a month. Moreover, the temple would continue to put pressure on them. Viscount Rose was not sure whether he would return at all, but when Winter looked at her with an icy gaze, the woman said that these were problems for Madame. She would only think about the young lady and her well-being. Cherie thought about all this. The temple put forward clear demands, but only because of her, for some reason, the Duchess decided to radically change her plans. Despite the fact that this could even threaten them, but she couldn't cause that much trouble for the future of Just Bones. so she said they should worry so much about her. She said that she was very grateful that the Duchess was taking her, so she had no right to detain them under any circumstances. But the woman did not listen to her. She said that the girl was probably already hungry and it was time for dinner, so she suggested that they go to the dining room together. But Elena said that she would first like to go to the young gentleman, since she promised to tell him about the lady's condition when she woke up. She would also like to ask him what kind of food the girl likes. Cherry could not believe that her words had just been ignored, and they began to insist on their own. This had never happened before. However, she understood that all this was not without reason. These people around her were so worried that she could not help but rejoice about it deep down in her soul. At that moment, she was about to get up, but she didn't have time because the Duchess took her in her arms and said that she remembers that time when Kebri was also 6 years old, and she could calmly take him like that. He said that her son weighed exactly the same as she did now, and Cherry felt very awkward being in her arms, so she said that she could actually go herself, but the girl didn't respond to this, so Cherry was ignored again, which made her a little upset. When they went out into the corridor, Kibrin immediately ran to meet them. When he saw Cherry, he was very happy that everything was okay with her. The girl turned to the boy and said that he must have been very scared, but now she was okay, so he didn't have to worry. But tears appeared in his eyes, and he said that she definitely couldn't go to heaven. When she heard this, she was so surprised that for a while she had nothing to say. She wondered what they had told him about her state of health, since he had thought that she could have already gone to heaven. At that moment, Elena, laughing awkwardly, said that it turned out that the young Duke had already heard their conversation in advance, and therefore she didn't even have to tell anything separately. When she heard about this, she was amazed. Cherry could not believe that he actually heard all this. Meanwhile, they had already brought her into the dining room and seated her at the table. She began to think about the fact that the Cybrian's room was on the top floor, so he definitely couldn't have heard their conversation. Even if he tried to eavesdrop on this in the corridor, the servants would send him back. So she decided that this question would need to be clarified with the boy. But when she saw this whole table set with various fatty foods, Cherry could not believe that they really wanted her to eat it all, because physically she would not be able to do it. But the boy and her doctor immediately began to support Cherry. They said that she would succeed. The main thing was to try. The Duchess, meanwhile, sat down opposite her and also began to eat, and then realized that the woman was not even going to stop them. She was also in favor of her eating it all. She understood that the sooner she started, the sooner she would finish. So after trying a spoonful of this wonderful hot soup, she was pleasantly surprised because it turned out to be very tasty. Some time has passed since then, and now the girl has finally eaten almost all the dishes. She just tried some of them, but she was still able to force the main thing down. After she finished it and said that she couldn't take any more, Elena praised her and replied that she still did a great job. The woman also explained that they would increase the portion gradually because it would be impossible to do everything at once. Cherry was very surprised to hear this. She asked the doctor if they would really be even bigger. The woman said that, of course, because she needed to get better as soon as possible so that they could leave. After the meal was over, Elena gave her an antipyretic or digestive medicine. There would be many more medications to take ahead, so Cherie needed to be patient. Kebrian decided to support her a little and said that there is no tasty food in heaven, so she definitely can't go there. She had to follow all the doctor's recommendations in order to recover as quickly as possible. The girls, of course, didn't like all this, but with a heavy sigh, she said that she would try. Now, she understood that if she eats and sleeps well, she will get better. But she did not understand why they treated her as if she had some kind of incurable disease. This was very suspicious for her. When dinner was over and evening came, the girl was able to ask to be allowed to spend the night with the Cybrian. However, she was not able to fall asleep quickly. She was lying in bed and suddenly began to think about the Duchess. She had been watching her from afar the whole time she was walking in the garden. Of course, she was the mistress of the ducal house, and she definitely had a lot of things to do. And that is why the skull was amazed that the woman decided to watch her. After the skull turned on its side and saw that the young duke was also not sleeping, she said that after all, Mother really was a good person. Despite the fact that the first impression was truly terrible, the skull realized that one should never rely on it. She remembered what exactly the woman had said to her that first time they met, and realized that perhaps she had said it because of the temple servants who were standing behind her, and not at all out of malice. Kibrion was glad that Cherry was not asleep, So turning to her, he said that he also really liked his mother, and Lady Cherry was also incredibly good. Then the girl realized that he probably said it so quickly so that she would not become jealous. Although this was impossible after this skull was interested in whether he liked himself. Kibrin thought about it for a while, but then he said that he liked his ears, which I definitely didn't expect to hear from him. So I asked him why he decided that. The guy explained that only thanks to them he heard what Mother and Elena were talking about and learned about her poor condition. He tried to do the same as when she hurt her hands, but there was no effect from this. With a heavy sigh, the boy said that he would really like to be of use to her, but Cherry, indignant, asked him to never say that again because he already helps her in so many ways. She asked if it was true that he had covered her with a blanket then. The boy immediately reached for the blanket and said that he was ready to do it again. The girl, indignant, said that she, of course, should also take cover. But Cypress beamed with joy and said that he really was fine. It was enough for him that Lady Cherry was not sick, so she did not have to worry about him at all. The girl, hearing this, was amazed. She immediately began to smile and thought that this boy was the sweetest in the world and could not imagine how he could be offended at all. When the next day came, I woke up quite early, but Cyprian was no longer there. She went down to breakfast and there were a lot of different dishes waiting for her. The maid, smiling happily, said that the lady should definitely eat it all. Mary explained that she didn't know what the young lady would like, so she prepared everything she could. This made Cherry feel a little uneasy, as she wasn't used to that kind of attention. The maid also smiled and said that when she had eaten everything, she should definitely take the medicine that Mrs. Elena had prescribed. The girl couldn't believe that she really had to eat all of this. At some point, she even realized that she could die from such a quantity of food. Cherie said in a trembling voice that she would like to eat later, but Mary sternly told us that this was not possible. She had to eat at least part of it in order to get better faster. She presented her with a dish of several eggs that was filled to the top and told her to at least eat it through it. Of course, even this was too much for her, but Mary asked her to try a piece first and realized that it was very tasty. The girl finally listened to her. She had to sit over this dish for quite a long time, but when she had the last piece left, she simply could not stand it all. She got up from the table and ran away, telling Mary that she simply couldn't eat anything else and asking the maid for forgiveness. And while the skull was lying in the corridor, through the open doors, she accidentally bumped into a man who was just leaving the room. The girl didn't notice him at all and almost fell. Fortunately, the Duke managed to catch her in time. He sat her in his arms and asked if everything was okay with her. When Sherry saw who exactly it was, she was also surprised because the Duke did not smell of cigars, and she thought that perhaps he had even quit smoking. At that very moment, a maid ran out after her and told the girl that she needed to eat at least a little more. When she saw the Duke, Mary stopped abruptly and fell silent. Having bowed, she greeted him and the man. Now everything became clear why Cherry ran so far and so fast. He told the maid that he would look after her himself so Mary could return to her duties. The girl bowed again, thanked him, and left. The man then turned around and began to leave. At that moment, the skull mentally asked for forgiveness from this beautiful angelic servant. She really didn't want to upset her, but she couldn't eat anymore. The man turned to the girl and said that if she didn't want to eat, she didn't have to eat anymore, but she said that she was very sorry for Mary. After all, she had been so worried since the morning and had prepared a lot of different dishes for her. The Duke said that if she overdoes it and vomits, she will worry even more. Therefore, it was necessary to find a compromise between all this. The girl thought about this and said that it was indeed true. At that very moment, the man opened the door and they went into his office. When she saw all this furnishings, she was very amazed, because at first she thought that this was his office, but after looking at the interior, she realized that it was the Duchess's office. The man did not answer her question. He put the girl on the ground and asked her to stand for a while. When Sherry saw his expression, she even thought about what she said, but the man suddenly asked in a stern voice, why Winter? She called him Mother and him simply Duke. She certainly didn't expect to hear such a question. The girl immediately corrected her address to Winter and said that it was probably the Duchess's office. The man was not happy that she had now decided to simply address her differently. Then, smiling, he said that she needed to change something else. The Duke said that she should have called him something less formal and addressed him differently if the word began with the letter P. The man explained that this was a word that could be used to describe someone like him, regardless of his status. Cherie then thought about this address and asked if he really meant the word ancestor. The man, of course, did not like this treatment at all, so he even turned away from her in order not to show his anger. He sighed heavily and walked up to the table, saying that maybe she knew that he was 3 years younger than Wint. Of course, Cherry didn't know about this at all, so she was surprised. The man was about to say something. However, as he passed by the window, Cherry looked out and saw that the young Duke was sitting there. She turned to the man and asked if she could go to him. When he heard this, he was very surprised and asked, was she really not afraid of the Cybran at all? Cherry didn't understand why she should suddenly be afraid of him, but the man, hearing this phrase, suddenly smiled and nevertheless lowered her to the ground. He told her to go anyway, but to be very careful not to fall. Cherie immediately thanked him and went to leave his office as quickly as possible. But when she came out, she stared blankly at the man who followed her with his gaze and wondered what he was trying to tell her, because she still didn't understand. She now thought about the fact that perhaps he would want her to call him Dad, but this surprised her terribly. She wasn't sure, so she decided she'd have to try again next time to guess what exactly he wanted. After she finally left the estate, she immediately went to the place where she saw her Duke. However, for some reason, he was no longer there. Cherie was very surprised, because she was absolutely sure that he was there. But then suddenly, the girl heard some conversation not far from her. She immediately recognized that it was the voice of the Cybran. However, she became curious about who he was talking to, so the girl came closer to listen. When she came closer, she heard the boy say that he knew that someone had escaped and even praised him. However, he also said that there was no need to bring more food. Cherry, due to the great distance, did not see him talking. She made a loud sound because of which the Kibrion noticed her. The girl suddenly realized that she had never asked him what he had been eating all this time while he had been living in the outbuilding before her arrival. When the guy saw her, he immediately greeted her and said hello. Then she remembered that he had incredibly good hearing. She walked up to him and asked if he had just talked to someone. The boy said that everything was exactly like that. However, he had already left. He was very shy to be among strangers. He asked if he was an animal by chance, because she saw a large naru that led straight to the ground. Kibrion said that it was an animal. However, he asked if it was strange. Cherry said that it was not strange at all, so he did not have to worry. When she sat down next to him and asked, "Isn't he sad after all? He left for the duchy?" He would part with his little friend, and they probably wouldn't be able to see each other for a very long time. But the boy said, with confidence in his voice, that everything was definitely fine. He explained that in the garden and in the forest, the duchy also had many friends, although he would not be able to go into the forest now. However, he would definitely find some way out. When Cherie heard that he couldn't be in the forest, she was very surprised and immediately, of course, asked why this was so. The boy explained that he couldn't wander around just anywhere. People were very scary, so he had to take care of himself. However, he smiled and said that everything was fine, so there was no need to worry. He said that now he had Lady Chiria and Mother, so he definitely couldn't be left alone. But through confidence in the voice, she said that if he later felt bad because of this, he should definitely tell her that she would take him anywhere. The boy, hearing this, could not believe it. Then Kibrion said that since she was ready to take him anywhere, he would be interested to see what kind of family she had. The girl certainly didn't expect to hear this. She became very excited and realized that it would be very difficult for her to implement this. In fact, the Count's trait, which only thinks about how to use her own child, and her own sister, who in the original story already held the title of villain, are clearly not the ones Cherry would want to introduce him to. Marioli County is a gathering place of people with disgusting personalities, and so she certainly wouldn't want the Cybrion to be there for even a minute. Then, Cherry suddenly came to the conclusion that her biggest weakness was her family. Even if she strengthened her position, they would probably talk all sorts of nonsense and ruin her title. She thought about how she could explain all this to the Cyber, but he was still too little and had never met such evil people. When he saw the expression on the skull's face, he immediately understood everything himself and said that apparently it was still impossible to implement something like this. The girl didn't want to upset him, so she said it wasn't that simple. She hated her family. They had a very bad relationship. So in fact, she realized that she needed to reveal the whole truth. Then she said that she was sold to the duchy. She was not a saint like her sister, and it was definitely impossible to make money on her. When the Cybrion didn't answer this, the girl was already thinking about whether she could talk about all this at all. And besides, what else could she tell him? But then suddenly the boy wanted to say something, but didn't have time because Mary was hurrying towards them. She was addressing the young lady and looked very excited. When Sherry saw her, she was immediately surprised, but the maid began to approach her, and Sherry realized that she needed to get up quickly. Kibrin decided to help her. He extended his hands and helped her to stand up. However, at that moment his hands suddenly dropped to her. Natalia, and he moved the girl closer to him. Cherry certainly didn't expect this. She felt a little awkward, but when he put her on the ground, she realized that he was still a little boy, so she didn't know where he got such great strength from. Mary had already run up to the lady in time. She took her hands and said that she was very sorry, so she asked her for forgiveness. She asked if it was really hard for her because of her. Mary didn't even give her time to say anything, and again she asked for forgiveness. She said that she just really wanted the girl to get better soon, and she didn't even think about how it would make her feel. Mary also explained that she realized that eating a lot for her health would not make her gain weight, so she again asked her for forgiveness and said that this would definitely never happen again. Cherie looked at the maid with great surprise. She could not believe that such an angel as Mary was asking her for forgiveness. She immediately said that Mary was not guilty of anything in front of her. She was grateful for all her care and work, so she asked that the woman never talk about herself like that again. They then hugged and thanked each other again, after which Mary said that they needed to return to the mansion. She would like to show her something. As soon as they returned, they were led through to a very beautiful, spacious room with a huge bed in the middle. The girl could not believe that all this was now for her. The mayor's office beamed with joy and asked if she liked her new room. The girl immediately said that this was not an attic. There were no cleaning supplies or cobwebs in this place, so she was delighted, especially considering the fact that there were no beetles or cockroaches there. When Mary heard all this admiration, she could not believe that the girls had to go through such a thing. She immediately told the little girl that everything she listed should not be in the room. She was sad about how terribly the county of Mariol treated such a sweet lady like her. When Sherry saw her expression, she immediately realized that she shouldn't have told the girl about this at all, because she was too sensitive. So she smiled and said that everything was fine. The county wasn't as bad as one might think, but Mary hugged her and said that now she would spend her best days in the duchy. She will also defend her with all her might. Things like what she said were simply unforgivable, but now everything is definitely okay. She said that the skulls were big. Well done. She was able to endure everything so courageously, so she had strong endurance. But now, the girl could definitely rely on them. When Sherry heard all this, she felt very strange. In fact, she just ended up in the body of this girl, and all this terrible thing happened to Sherry before her rebirth. However, for some reason, she could not hold back her tears when she began to hug the maid. She did not understand at all why this was so, but her soul even felt very pleasant. She felt as if she had been the real Cherry from the very beginning, but with a trembling voice due to tears, she thanked Mary, and for some time they hugged like this. When several hours had passed and night had come, the girl lay sleeplessly for some time on her large, spacious bed. She wondered what kind of feeling she had in the past. It seemed as if it was hers, and the thoughts that were in her head now also seemed real. Then the girl thought about the fact that perhaps all this was due to the fact that she gradually began to merge with her.